Hey everyone, this is Ope, and in Beyond the Build, we talk about all of the other stuff that goes on beyond just writing the code. So we might talk a bit about writing code, but like being a software engineer is a lot more than just building software. It's about all the other things. So yeah, we try to go over all those things in this podcast.
Yeah. Today we're talking about using AI in your work and just using AI to write code or AI writing code that you're supposed to write or or however way you use AI and just our experiences with it and our thoughts on how certain things go. So yeah, to start, I want to pose a question to you. Do you use AI in your work?
Hell yes, I do. What? I definitely do use AI at work.
How? How do you use AI at your work?
Oh, a number of stuff. Sometimes, like, I want to write some nuanced thing I want to do. So, for example, how do I do a distinct in Spark when there are column collisions or some weird stuff? I am not going to keep that stuff in my head. I will just have AI tell me the code because, like, it's faster than, like, doing a search and finding Stack Overflow articles.
Yeah. So in some way, you kind of use AI to replace Stack Overflow on how to do certain things.
Yeah.
Okay. For me, I definitely use it, but I use it to explain code because I see the code, but sometimes, so I work in a very heavy C#. Well, I used to work in a very heavy C# thing, and they used deep object-oriented design. When I say deep, I mean interfaces everywhere. So there's like dependency injection from this place. Some stuff are very .NET dependent, and I'm like, yo, I have like this thing looks very, very complicated, right? And I just copy a whole class, and then I ask, okay, how does, like, what's the relationship between these things? And then it just tells me. And then sometimes it has nuances to say, based on how this code is written, the thing that you're looking for is not inside here, right? It's coming in through this injected dependency or stuff like that. And it's kind of like stuff where I would sometimes maybe I would have otherwise asked a senior engineer, but I'm like, all right, I just paste it here and then it tells me and then I can then go, or just go to them with more direct question to say, okay, I know this thing is not here. Where is it? So that's how I use it. I also use it to kind of explain certain concepts, like I think it was anonymous functions or like directives in C#. And I was like, it looks familiar, but I don't know what is happening. And then I'll paste it and be like, all right, what is this thing? And I'll be like, oh, it looks like it's a, and I'm like, and then, that's basically how I use it. Yeah.
So I think on that note, I also use AI for other things as well. So I sometimes use it to help me think about design patterns. And also because I'm a data engineer, so I write Java, Python, and Scala. So I might think about I know how to do something maybe in Python. I'm like, what is the Scala equivalent of this exact thing? So I can write it in Python and then say, hey, what's the Scala equivalent of this? Or like, for example, I'm thinking about, I want to write software and I'm trying to figure out what design pattern to use. So I can sometimes have AI say, hey, like, I was going to use orchestrator pattern, but what might be alternatives and like, why might that be good versus bad? And like, have it critique some alternatives so I know, like, so I can have like a decent conversation about what pattern to use.
Yeah, that I think that makes sense. I've also used it to kind of generate unit tests in certain scenarios where I've been like, hey, that's for my own personal work, right? I'm like, hey, this is the class, right? And to that sense, I actually want us to dive into a specific thing that happened. So I was working on this Flutter project, right? It's for an app that I built called the Optil app. And the app basically just helps you keep track of upcoming events that you have coming up. That's all the app does. And every year or every couple of years, I try to update the app, right? As much as I can. And I was trying to update it this year. And I was like, all right, one thing, the code is growing. I wanted to add iOS widgets to the app. The code is growing. Let me add unit tests. When I started this app, it was in 2020. I was fresh out of college. I didn't know what unit test was. With years of experience now, I'm like, all right, let me add some sort of testing. And I hadn't written tests to test widgets. So I was like, man, this thing is new to me. I read the documentation. I was like, oh, yeah, it looks simple. The documentation always looks simple, right? They always show you the most rudimentary, the most simple, the most breakdown. Like, all right, you have A and you have B. C comes next. You're like, no shit. But in your actual work, it's like you have to go write some poetry, just some very, very complicated stuff. So when I then went to go write the test for my own, code, it was like, man, it would have taken me days or if not weeks. And I was like, man, I didn't have time to do this. Then I heard of Cursor AI, the thing, and I was like, oh, yeah, I can simply just use Cursor AI, absolutely. So I downloaded it and I asked it, I was like, hey, write unit test for the login.dart file. And it was like, oh, sure. And it just generated like 7-8 tests. And I was like, yo. And I was going through the test and it actually made sense. Everything it was testing for, it was doing a lot of stuff. I was like, yo. This is great.
Nice.
I really don't, whoa, okay. You know what I mean? I was like, this is amazing.
Yeah.
And I ran the test. They all failed.
Yeah. Yep.
They all failed.
Yep.
And I was like, oh, okay. The test in theory looked great, what they're testing for, but all of the tests failed. And I went to go try to figure out why the tests were failing. And I could not I felt hopeless. I felt aimless because that wasn't my code.
Yeah.
You understand what I mean? Like,
you bring up a very important point, and that is the real problem. One of my big problems with using AI a lot to code is coding is actually a process where you build a mental model in your head, and then you interact with that mental model while you type to get it to do something. When you start to pull things from somewhere that you don't have a mental model of, you don't know how things fit any longer, right? And I think that comes into play when you try to say, hey, I want to debug this thing. Well, if you don't understand how it works, or you're using like AI, like you get suggestions to use like patterns or libraries or tools that you have no familiarity with, it might actually work. Like, I think it's even worse when it works, but it might actually work. But literally, your mental model has started to diverge from what your code base looks like. So you cannot reason about your code. And I think that is the most important thing that a software engineer is able to do. Like, reason about your code in a way that is faithful to what your code and your compiler and your build environment and the deployed environment are going to do. And if you cannot match, if there's a mismatch between those two things, you start to get into problems where, oh, your manager says, oh, like, just change this one small tiny thing, but you don't know where
or how
exactly,
or in this, like, you know what meant to do. But as you said, I think you bring up a very, very important point, because that's exactly what was happening with me in that scenario, where I didn't feel confident enough to make that change, because it wasn't my code, right? It was in my project, but it wasn't my code. And I'm like, and they say, oh, there's an error in this line. I'm like, what is this line even doing? Right? I have no idea why this line is there or what this line is doing. And then, if you've written unit tests, you have to kind of like, there's 3 steps, AAA, arrange, assert, test, or something like that. But first you have to do some specific arrangement, right? You create a few mock objects, or you do anything. Then you call the actual function. Then you test the, this thing. Then arrange, act, assert. Right? You arrange the test, then you act, right? You call the function, and then you assert whether the outcome is true or false. But I didn't understand anything that was happening in the arrange, because I didn't arrange anything, right? Act, it was clear. I knew what it was trying to test. It was trying to test whether when it pressed a button, it would go to the next page. And then the assert came back and it was false. But then I didn't understand any of the arrange. And it took me like I had to step away from it, then come back to it, because I was like, man, I was overwhelmed. Right? I had 7 of them that were failing, and it was a lot of code to like debug. And then when I came back from it, I realized this thing was arranging things it didn't need to arrange.
Yep.
Right? It was adding extra layer of complication that wasn't needed. Some of them was making the code to fail, but most of them were just like, yeah, I can see why you would want to arrange this, but arranging this wouldn't change the outcome of this test. Right? So it's like, that's when it then hit me. Yeah, this thing is great, but it also adds an extra layer of jargons. It's more code. It's more lines of code, more things that need to go through, right? And that's just for test. If it does actual implementation, it'll be a whole different thing, because it'll then add code in a way where you're like, if you don't understand it, you're cooked. Literally.
And another part of what the problem with using AI is that in reality, what you should always remember is that no matter what model you're using, there is a concept of a context window. There is only so much that the model can get fed. And also depends on how you use the model, right? Because if you're using ChatGPT and you're copying and pasting lines of code, it doesn't get the full context of the project you're working on, right? It gets the context of just what you've given it. So it's very possible and very easy that you will start to diverge from the way other things have been done in the project, because you are working on one small subset of features, for example, and then you use ChatGPT a lot, and then you just make your own patterns. And every other part of the repo and every other part of the project uses a different pattern. But because, for example, the model or the AI doesn't get all the other context, I think some of this might be solved by using something like Cursor, for example, that gets rid of your repo. But if that doesn't happen, then you get to a spot where like you just are doing your own weird thing and you're logging weirdly, or you're just following different patterns from every other feature that you haven't touched, because there is no crosstalk about how that part is evolving from how this part is evolving, right? So I think that's a thing as well with using AI.
Yeah, I think when we get to, we're at the place now where, was it Mark Zuckerberg was like, there'll be mid-level software engineers. There'll be AI doing work of mid-level software engineers. The CEO of Salesforce, or one company was like, yeah, we're not going to hire anymore. Like last year, they were like in net zero for new software engineers.
Klarna, I think.
Yeah. Was it Klarna?
Well, some weird some one of these companies anyway.
Yeah, I think it was Salesforce. And then there was one other company that was like, what did they say? There are all this, talks about, hey, AI is going to replace software engineers. AI is coming for this. There's the Devon, this thing that came out. And it's like, I see those, and I think in theory for simple stuff, right? For very, very rudimentary stuff, I see maybe you want to spin up a simple web server that just maybe gets data and then sends it to an S3 bucket.
Yeah.
Simple.
Yeah.
The second it starts to get more complicated, the second it starts to have nuances where it's like, okay, in theory, they should work. But anybody with common sense would realize that, okay, this needs to be done a completely different way, because in the future, we have to account for this, because we know the AI doesn't know the future, right? The AI doesn't have experience.
Yeah.
All the AI does is just, it knows patterns of code that it has seen before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think with AI doing all your code, I think you get to a point where your PM has an idea for a project, doesn't have understanding of feasibility, and then just requests that AI build this. And then you get a 200,000 line project automatically built. But building the software is not all that a software engineer does. It actually is like maintaining the software, dealing with updates, all that stuff. So like there's that mismatch between like, oh, you can generate a lot of code, but then you actually have to maintain that code, and you're legally on the hook for things the code does. But how does that get solved? So like the idea of like AI is going to take away the jobs. I think AI will reduce the number of people required to do certain lots of tasks, and like it will massively improve productivity. But I also don't think that that's going to be the end of the world. And also, to be honest, like if so imagine two companies, Facebook and TikTok. If Facebook can write the code in 1/3 the time, TikTok can also write the code in 1/3 the time. So their competition just gets more intense, because then you're like, oh, I can do this. Well, we can start to do that stuff in 2 weeks, and then both companies just compete more intensely, and they just need more new features.
Yeah.
So the feature rollout cadence so for example, your VP might have pushed 12 projects every year. Now it can make 24 or 36. So things that would have been below the cut line 3 years ago will now make the cut line. But there's going to be more stuff, and like the more things you ship, the more bugs you ship, the more problems you ship.
I think that's something that people don't even talk about enough. It's majority of the time you're not writing new code.
Yes.
You're reading code that other people have written and trying to modify it or trying to change it in some way, right?
Yep.
And maybe I'm wrong, but I can't imagine AI doing it as well and understanding the nuances in certain aspects, right? Because let me listen. Every time I've faced a challenging problem at work that has to do with, okay, man, this thing is so hard. The one time that I've been like, all right, let me just carry everything and give AI, it sucked at it.
Yes.
And this isn't, small models, right? Like, I think it was 4 at the time. It sucked, right? Like or I'm like, all right, let me try to give it as much context as possible. Help me with this thing. It didn't help. Like, it was giving me things that wasn't, I'm like, this won't work, right? Yeah. But to it has to give me something. So it just spits out whatever, right? So ultimately, I think, yeah, with more code and with more stuff happening, we need to use AI to kind of like be more productive. But ultimately, right, I really loved what you said there, where it's like coding is not just about writing the code, right? There's a mental model that you're building as you're interacting, and the more you use AI and you're not understanding it, the more you are divergent from it.
Yeah, and like honestly, if you're a decently junior engineer, at some point AI is going to suggest code that your principals don't understand.
Exactly.
And it will destroy your MR.
Yeah.
Just heads up. Like if you are doing super complicated stuff in code that is beyond your principal's ability to easily understand, you're going to get feedback to say, hey, like
make this more simple. Yeah.
And also like this is not junior engineer code. You're using like patterns, like obviously you might be like ridiculously smart, but like if you're writing code that is super nuanced and like very hard to debug, as somebody that mentors engineers at work, when I see stuff that was clearly written by AI and the person is asking me to spend my time like decomposing and understanding that, and it clearly is like not what I expect from the person's mental model of the work, I am more wary when I review that MR, because I'm like, hey, if this person, I don't think the person completely understands what code they are writing. So then I am very wary, and then I go, if it happens a few times, I'm like, hey, like, did you use ChatGPT to write this code? Like, did you write this code yourself? And not because like I don't think the person is smart, but I think like there's a lot more, not their code that is showing up there. And I've seen their code a decent amount of times that I kind of know like what energy I'm going to bring to a MR review. So
yeah, I think ultimately you need to understand what you're copying.
Yeah.
Right? Don't just, like, how do I put it? ChatGPT and AI isn't the easy way out. Yeah. It's more of, I think, to be honest, I just see it as an Stack Overflow on steroids.
Yeah.
Right? Where you're not having to read through and weave through several posts to like upvote things or to like downvote things. Yeah.
Also, because we're about to wrap up, do you have like tips on how to use AI well at work?
The one way that I would say is, the way that I found works for me is, and this is not just me specifically or related to work, give as much context as possible.
Fair.
Context, right? Context. Like, we're so used to prompts being one line, right? Bro, a prompt can be 3 pages, right? The more you do that, then the better it gets at giving you exactly what you want. Yeah. What about you?
I have different opinions. I think when you tell AI to generate code for you, ask it to explain itself. Very, very, very verbose. To be honest, like, I would explain itself and then ask it, hey, are there simpler alternatives? And always be asking, are there simpler alternatives? And if you have a few code samples, say, hey, can you write in my code style? But like, try to get it to simplify and make sure that it explains every single line before you copy paste it. Like, make sure you understand every single line of what it is doing. Make sure you understand if it's putting in a new dependency, ask why. Can you do this simpler? But don't just ever copy and paste the code that AI gives you. Like, interrogate it very, very well to be sure that you want to put that code in your code base.
I think that's a big one. That's a big plus on the ask why, because it's giving you the code. Might as well ask it what its reasoning is, right? If anything, have it give you the code line by line, right? All right, and explain each one, right? Like, kind of break it down into steps. That way, even you can go put comments in there so you have a better understanding, right? Ultimately, these AI models, these AI tools, they're there to make life better. They're there to make life easier. You just have to use them properly.
Yeah.
And understand what they're giving you. Otherwise, you just become dumber, for lack of a better way of putting it, right? You're putting out a lot, but not actually understanding what you're actually doing. Yeah.
All right. So I think that's it. We're at time, but that was good.
Yeah.
Use AI carefully at work, and stay safe, y'all.
Thank you so much for tuning in. We will catch you on the next one. Until then, stay safe.